The Northern Lights out in full force this week, dancing over mushers and Nome and dazzling Alaskans across the state. This week on Frontiers, we go Aurora hunting, Alaska style.
All of a sudden they just turned red right over Denali, and I got the shot.
Find out what lengths one Alaska photographer will go to capture what he calls the hero shot.
There were things that happened back then that will never happen again.
And speaking of Alaskan adventures, Joe May says that he was lucky to compete in the Iditarod when it was young and new, a very different kind of race than what mushers experience today.
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by CHUGACH Corporation and Spenard Builders Supply. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program, where we take time out to appreciate how Alaska is one of the most beautiful places to explore, a wide, open frontier for adventure. This time of the year, though, all you have to do is look into the night sky. Turns out March is one of the best months to see the aurora, and we had many sightings around the state this week, even on the Iditarod Trail. Photojournalist John Thain captured the Northern Lights at the finish line in Nome. And an Anchorage photographer caught this real-time video by the Old Glen Highway near Wasilla and Palmer. Todd Salat says that this footage was taken on Pi Day, March 14th. He says a strong gust of solar wind generated brilliant auroras worldwide. Incredible footage, and we'll hear more from Todd Salat in a few minutes. But first, we head north to Bettles, where Lauren Maxwell and photojournalist John Thain went chasing the Northern Lights. Now, you stayed at a lodge that was specially set up just for this.
Yeah, and you know, really was a great trip, very special, but of course always a little bit of a gamble because you never know if the Northern Lights will make an appearance, no guarantees. We joined a group of other hopeful guests, some of whom had traveled a long way to catch a glimpse of the Northern Lights.
Just getting to Bettles is an adventure. It's an hour's ride from Fairbanks on a small plane that skirts the Brooks Range and drops us off 35 miles north of the Arctic Circle.
I'm Eric. I'm John.
John, nice to meet you.
Eric Fox is the airstrip greeter.
All right, guys.
Eric and his wife Heather own the Bettles Lodge, which is where everyone here is headed. And all of us have the same question.
How'd the lights been?
Excellent for the past 6 nights in a row.
Wow. That's exciting.
Yes, it is.
You guys
it
hear
looks
that?
like another good night shaping up as well.
The lights are what bring guests to this tiny town in the dead of winter. Year-round population, 14.
Everybody just stop for a second and listen to this. Nothing. No sirens, no horns honking. It is such a welcome change.
The skies here are some of the clearest in the state, but the weather is some of the coldest.
Next door to the coldest ever recorded temperature on the continent. Gobbler's Knob, it was 82 below zero, I think in the late 70s.
Not many people would want to live in such a remote place.
Good afternoon, Bettles Lodge. This is Heather.
But Eric and Heather are two that do. The couple bought the historic lodge less than 2 years ago. Now they host guests from all over the world.
I'm excited because we had spoke to some friends that we know that had seen it a few years ago, and they said that it was a life-changing experience.
As the sun goes down, the wait begins.
11 p.m. to 3 a.m. is the best chances we have. That's when we're directly opposite of the sun.
It isn't long before we're rewarded with a night sky full of twinkling stars.
Ursa Major, the Big Dipper right there.
Oh yeah.
And a first look at the aurora.
They dance like from clear over there up to here.
Oh my gosh, look at the shape of that thing. It's got like, oh, that's great.
It was too much.
Guests shuttle in and out of the lodge to check out the sky.
They're starting to come back out over there again.
As the night goes on, the lights grow more intense.
Whoa! That's so wild.
It's a whole rainbow now. I call that the rainbow.
Stretching in bands that seem to bridge the sky.
There's nothing like this.
Then dissolving into glittering curtains of shimmery light.
It changes constantly.
It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and no one wants to go to bed.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Why risk turning in when you could miss the best part?
Isn't that gorgeous? Look at the arc from one horizon to the other.
All of us feel lucky to be here on a cold night in Bettles.
It's staggeringly beautiful.
Knowing there are no guarantees with Mother Nature. But on this night,
all expectations met.
She didn't disappoint.
Now, to have an Aurora viewing experience at the Bettles Lodge starts at about $1,300. That's for a 2-night stay, and it does include airfare from Fairbanks.
Now, those are pretty steep prices. How does it pencil out for a business like this?
I think one of their biggest challenges is being so remote. Everything needs to be flown in, so of course that's part of the cost there.
Now, you've been in Alaska a long time. How did these northern lights compare to what you've seen before?
They were pretty spectacular. They really were moving about, and when you looked up, you could see some of the faintest green, but interestingly enough, they really bloomed when you looked through the camera lens, able to pick up more of the colors. And one other thing, the stars were out. The show of the stars was almost equal to the northern lights. So beautiful on a clear, cold night.
Yeah, to be able to see something like that in the raw wilderness, wonderful. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to chasing the lights, a little scientific knowledge goes a long way. Todd Salat makes his living photographing them, and he'll tell us why March is prime time for Aurora hunting.
We have a story of 27 families that put 18 months of their lives into building a village, a home for themselves and their future. Our Inupiaq culture goes back thousands of years, carried by a strong sense of community. Our relationship with our natural surroundings is at the heart of our culture. By investing in future generations through development that is balanced with the love of our land, the Kupi Corporation brings together traditions of the past with visions of the future.
Your home generator can be a lifesaver during a power outage. It's important to separate your generator from the power grid with an isolation switch. Otherwise, it could feed power back into the system and seriously injure or kill alignment. Have a qualified electrician install the switch near your meter so that both you and the utility can see that your generator has been isolated. This important safety message is brought to you by CHUGACH Electric, powering Alaska's future.
Air travel for Frontiers is provided by Pen Air. When business or recreation takes you anywhere across the state, Pen Air is there. The only family-owned airline serving Alaska. Pen Air, the spirit of Alaska.
When I first came up here, I was told about stories. Tell me a story, and how important it was to tell the stories here in Alaska. And it's true. Highlights matter, but you got to tell stories about people. That's ultimately what it is.
College, the best years of your life.
I get it, I want to be normal.
Unless you're the daughter of the Secretary of State.
How can I help you guys? So much for normal.
A new Madam Secretary. Then
they're trying to bring down another governor.
The battle.
Your husband has a target on his back.
Is just beginning.
Mrs. Florek, I have several questions I think the grand jury would like answered.
What are you gonna do?
The Good Wife final season continues after a new Madam Secretary tonight.
You may have seen his work at the downtown Anchorage Weekend Market or art galleries like this one. Todd Salat is known to many Alaskans as the Aurora Hunter. He was born a country boy in Iowa, and work as a geologist brought him to Alaska. But in 1996, Todd decided to quit his day job and devote himself to chasing northern lights. And Todd joins us now to share a few of what he likes to call his hero shots. But maybe first we ought to explain what the heck is a hero shot.
Well, thanks for having me on the show today, Rhonda. I appreciate it. And a hero shot is one of those photographs that you come back to after a week or two of camping, and you show it to my wife as first pass and the rest of the world, and if they go, wow, you feel like a hero.
You know, I think a lot of news photographers feel that way. If we call it maybe the money shot. Same difference though.
Too, yeah.
But so we have asked you to pick 5, and I know that must have been hard to do because we've seen hundreds of your photographs out there. But let's start with the very first one. Now this one is called Floating in Alaska, and it's the one that's right behind us. But tell us the story behind this float plane and this amazing auroral display.
Well, picking the #1 shot I've ever taken was very easy. Floating in AK has gotten a reaction I have never seen before. And I took it right here in Anchorage, down at Lake Hood. And it was one of those nights when the auroras were coming in early, like 9 p.m. And I didn't know which way to go. And I asked my wife as I was tucking her in her bed, where should I go to get this, chase the auroras? And she goes, go to Lake Hood and get a float plane shot. And I was like, wow, great idea. And then came across this old red Cessna 195. Roars came through in bands and got the shot and came crawling into bed at 5 in the morning, and she said, did you get the shot? And I was like, I think so.
Well, if that's your #1, your #2 ain't too shabby either. This one is called Worldview and having something whirled around. So what's the backstory on that photograph?
That's one of my new releases I just took in January of 2015, just this past year, down by Hope. Once again, there was a big solar flare, a coronal mass ejection.
You're going to have to explain that in a bit, but go on.
Okay, yeah. There was a scientific reason for blasting out of town and getting into position as soon as possible. And I got down there on Turnagain Arm, crawled myself inside of a spruce tree, set up my tripod, and I pretty much stayed there for about 4 nights. The tide was coming in, causing this big whirl in the Turnagain Arm down there, and then the auroras came through the hole. I got the shot with the composition that's always so important to me, and it's done very well. So this one is definitely into the hero shot category.
Well, most of us are just pretty proud to get any old shot of an aurora, but maybe you should backtrack and tell us what this term is, coronal mass ejection.
That's a CME.
That sounds scary to me.
Well, it can be if you're an astronaut. There's a lot of energy being kicked out by the sun during a coronal mass ejection. And if that's pointing towards Earth, a couple days later it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that is what generates, that's the energy source for the aurora. Electrons zinging down through our atmosphere, ionosphere.
So how do you find out about these?
NASA, NOAA, they have telescopes trained on the sun right now. If there's a coronal mass ejection, they're on it within seconds.
And so, I know that it was very hard to get you on our program because it had to fit in with your aurora hunting schedule. So I guess you're always on alert to look for these?
Yeah, I am pretty much always on alert, but about 2 weeks of every month, usually around the full moon, plus and minus a week, I like to go out there and just get out of town, got a camper on the back of my truck, and head north toward the Brooks Range or the Wrangles, just someplace way out, and then just get into the zone.
Well, right now we are in the midst of the spring equinox, and that seems to be a very important time for aurora hunters. Why?
March is one of the most popular months of the entire year. Fairbanks is going crazy with tourism from folks around the world coming. And it has to do, I believe, with the tilt of the sun compared to the tilt of the Earth. And there's a lot of the solar wind connection with the Earth's magnetic field, and blammo, there's a lot more auroras in March typically.
Well, we've got #3 in our top 5 hero shots. This is called the Valley of Light. What is the story behind this image?
That was way up in the Brooks Range back in the film days, earlier on in my career, and I had a fisheye lens. The auroras were going off all over the place. And I turned around and the moon was dead center in a glacier-carved valley. Had my fisheye lens, I looked through it, it looked like an eyeball, took the shot, and got it back, weeks later and went, wow, looks like an eye. And
it's kind of cosmic, almost.
It was cosmic, yeah, it's the eye of whatever you want it to be.
And now we have #4, the Goddess of Dawn.
That was another one of those moments where it was an all-nighter. It was in January. I actually wrote in my journal, alone, uninspired. And then the auroras came out, and I was about ready to go to bed for the day. And right at dawn, like 7:30 in the morning, all of a sudden they just turned red right over Denali. And I got the shot, and that was a big one.
And so now we have the legendary lady, number 5.
Legendary Lady was taken right out here by Earthquake Park, another local Anchorage shot. And for 10 years, I'd been going out there by the airport and trying to get the auroras to come right over the sleeping lady. And that night they did, and it was just wonderful.
10 years you waited to get that shot.
I just kept going and going and going, and that's usually when I get a location in mind. I don't seem to rest until I get the shot of the auroras in that particular composition, if you will.
Well, let's talk about your wife, because I imagine that she's got to be pretty patient with you taking off and spending nights waiting for these money shots or hero shots.
My wife is the unsung hero of this business in my mind, and I sing to her a lot and tell her that, but she's the backbone, is what I say. She's been a super great partner. I met her in 1999 on a blind date, and ever since then we've been inseparable, and we call it Team Salat shots.
Because she goes out with you a lot of times camping.
She does. I can usually convince her to go out in September, or maybe March if I got a nice heated cabin up in Hatcher Pass, or but usually the deep cold months she's like, you go, lone wolf. But she's been just wonderful, wonderful teamwork.
Well, I've got to ask you this, because we've heard dog mushers talk about this, of being able to hear the aurora. And they say that sometimes they know that the aurora is going to make these hissing and crackling sounds when the dogs start pointing their ears to listen for it. So, you've been out a lot. Have you heard the aurora?
For some reason, I have never heard them before, but I've had hundreds of people tell me they've heard them, and they always describe it the same way, kind of a hissing or crackling sound. So I know the aurora does emit some kind of radio signal, and maybe certain kind of ears can pick up on that.
Well, I hope one day that I get to hear it, and I'd also like to see some auroras with colors, the deep magentas. I've only seen green ones.
Green is by far the most popular, most common color of the auroras, and just occasionally you get a special show where they turn red or pink and purple, usually near dawn or dusk.
So you've been doing this, as a business for about 20 years, just focusing on auroras. So I can't imagine that there's much you haven't gotten yet, that you've probably had about every hero shot that you've wanted. but what is out there that's eluding you?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm constantly searching for that. It's all about the hunt, the aurora hunt, and what haven't I shot before. And I think that actually stimulates me to try to find new foregrounds, whether it's the Kennecott Mine or the Sleeping Lady. Denali's always a good go-to. But right now, as I head out in the next day or two, I am not sure where I'm going to go. I'm just kind of blown with the wind, and then you just get into a spot that catches your eye, and then I really get focused.
Well, thanks for sharing, some of your adventures with us, and we'll talk more in a web extra. We'll carry on our conversation on the web, and you can provide us with some pointers and some of your secrets, I hope. A few of them, anyway.
All right, thank you,
All right,
Rhonda.
thanks.
You're
Todd
welcome.
Salat. Up next, a visit with Joe and Sandra May at their cabin in Trapper Creek. Some tales of the trail from the early days of the Iditarod. The dogs may have been bigger and slower back then, but Joe May says they were a whole lot tougher, and a look at why they had to be.
At Spenard Builder Supply, we know it takes a lot of ingredients to get it just right. That's why we have design centers in every store to personalize the most important rooms in your home. We'll help you select cabinets, faucets, and appliances that fit your style. So all you have to worry about is how much oregano goes in Mom's pasta sauce. Spenard Builder Supply. Building for life.
Now offering financing with no payments or interest for 12 months. Visit our design experts today at your local Spenard Builder Supply.
I just want cremation.
No hidden costs, no add-ons.
Cremation is much more affordable.
Dignified, ecological.
I just want something basic. The simpler, the better.
Cremation sure makes a lot of sense. The Cremation Society of Alaska is now serving families in Anchorage and in the Valley, and we are always on the web at alaskacremation.com. Call us today at 277-2777 or in the Valley 373-8627.
We think that how you get there is as important as being there. Schedule passenger service, charters, cargo, work, or play. The spirit of Alaska is who we are. When business or work takes you to Bristol Bay, Dead Horse, or anywhere across the state, Pen Air is there. Trust the only family-owned airline serving Alaska for over 60 years. Pen Air. Let us be a part of your journey.
To be an anchor is to stay in one place. But don't tell that to KTVA 11 anchor Emily Carlson. For Emily, journalism isn't a desk job. Because to understand Alaska, you've got to embrace it. Every corner, every season. Because an anchor gets rusty unless it keeps moving. Emily Carlson at KTVA 11 News. Be there.
With cell phones and internet access, it's much easier to appreciate what it takes to run the Iditarod. And hard to imagine a time when the race was young, an adventure across a 1,000-mile stretch of trail with very few eyes watching. But Joe May says that there are many stories worth hearing, in danger of being forgotten. We caught up with him at his cabin in Trapper Creek.
Joe May likes living away from town. He enjoys the chores and takes pride in his homemade log splitter.
Part of a hot water heater, part of a snow machine, part of an old well pipe.
Joe feels no pressure to conform.
Constant coffee, constant cigarettes, and stress.
That sums up Joe's life as a Marine in Korea and his service in the Merchant Marine Fleet. He finally found his way to Trapper Creek, thanks to a hitchhiker's tip about cheap land in Alaska.
This is my first cabin, Rhonda, and my first dog. I built this cabin with hand tools. I didn't use a chainsaw, I had no machinery, and I did it alone.
Joe worked a 100-mile trap line with a team of 11 dogs, but it was a chance meeting with Dick Mackey that turned him into an accidental racer. Mackey and Joe Reddington were scouting out a trail for a 300-mile Iditarod warm-up race and invited him to join in.
And I said, we got scruffy, hairy little trapline dogs. And he said, come on out. He said, you'll have fun.
Joe surprised himself during that race.
I won it. I won it by 6 hours. I beat Reddington, Mackey. I beat the best of them. The first time I ever took a dog team out on the trail. And I came home from that, my head was like this.
And the next thing he knew, he was running the Iditarod.
If you want to know what exhaustion looks like, that's what exhaustion looks like. It was a different race. It wasn't the same race.
4 out of the last 5 wearing bib number 16.
With less than 8.5 days on the trail, Dallas Seavey set a new record for the race this year. When Joe May finished his first Iditarod in 1976, it took him more than 19 days, with some mushers out on the trail for a month.
There was something in the race back then that's missing today.
Perhaps it's the hospitality that mushers relied upon.
You'd come up the hill, and there'd be an 8-year-old kid up there on top of the hill, and he's waiting for you. And he'd say, Ma's got some fish on the table, I'll take your leaders. And he'd grab the neckline.
The rules have since changed in the interest of fairness, but for Joe May and many of the early mushers, a big part of the adventure, the chance to experience native culture.
I have a lot of friends up north that I wouldn't have had were it not for the race.
One of Joe's most valued friendships on the trail, Herbie Nayakpuk, a Shishmaref musher who seemed almost like a dog whisperer.
I've never seen anyone who was closer to his dogs than Herbie. This is what the finish line looked like in 1976. That's Angus.
He's beefy looking.
He is fat, all kinds of hair.
Angus was typical of the dogs that ran the Iditarod.
Joe Reddington Jr., a former world champion.
Now check out Joe Reddington Jr.'s team at the start of the 1975 Iditarod. These dogs were not too many generations from those bred to haul heavy loads long distances.
The dogs up there were sifted or sorted out for efficiency and for quality by a no work, no eat ethic.
Even Fur-Rondi sprint dogs had some heft to them.
The first teams, the early teams in the Iditarod were native teams. They came out of the villages. That's where the good dogs were.
Sprint racing's legendary George Atla told Joe his secret.
He said the best sled dogs in Alaska come out of a gene pool of 100 dogs.
From the Yukon and Kayakuk rivers.
This was one of the good ones, Rhonda. This is typical of the dogs back in that era, the good village dogs. And you just don't see them out there anymore. There's a nobility to the dog. There certainly is.
Gladstone, a wheel dog who refused to quit. You can see the stubbornness in his eyes in a portrait painted by Joe's wife, Sandra.
There's some pretty nice-looking dogs there.
Joe had a major role in a new book about the Iditarod's first 10 years.
There were things that happened back then that will never happen again. The race today doesn't present the possibilities that existed back then.
Joe won the race in 1980.
That team that won the race in 1980 couldn't win the race today. Tough enough, but not quite fast enough. If you would take the winning team from this year's race back to about 1975 and run them through one of those bad trails, he would not finish first.
It would be an entirely different race for today's breed of dogs who enjoy amenities like better trail maintenance and straw. And as the race changed, so did Joe's life.
This is Sandra. She helped me train the 1982 team.
Joe met Sandra while demonstrating dog mushing in the Netherlands. He proposed marriage the day after they met. When he finished the 1982 Iditarod, Joe sold his team and bought a sailboat so they could travel the world. And now?
Our whole life is in this little cabin.
And just across the way, a stream meanders, a reminder that life keeps moving on. And yet, the magic of the trail is still with us, changing with the times.
Good dog.
Joe May is part of a group known as the Old Iditarod Gang, which compiled an anthology of race history called Iditarod, the First 10 Years. It's an adventure just to thumb through its many pages, and you can buy that book at the Anchorage Museum. One other note, we want to thank the Alaska Moving Image Preservation Association and the Alaska Film Archives for their use of historical footage. As we found out in this week's program, adventure in Alaska means many things to many people. But there are experiences like the Iditarod and the Northern Lights which bring us together and make us feel lucky we live in such a special place. Thanks for joining us as we explore frontiers both past and present. We'll see you next week.